But we're living in, like John Davidson said, a darkened world in which it's a competition between secularism and the new paganism. And as the world becomes more secular and maybe even pagan, we've got to double down on the things that we hold dear, because we used to have culture would serve as a kind of buttress or aid to the Christian, because it was essentially a Christian culture when I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
That it might not have run deep, but there was everybody. That's why I went to a public school till through fourth grade, but all my teachers were Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So when they say, when they pledge allegiance under God, they kind of meant it. And that's a different world now, where Christians are fewer and far between, but even more than that, they are virulently anti-Christian.
Welcome back to On the Line. In today's episode, we sit down with Dr. Peter Scaer, and our main focus in this interview is going to be to understand the third use of the law, which is the way that God's instructions, his law, works in our life to help us put on Christ and become more Christ-like. This is something that's had some controversy within the Lutheran Church as far as how do we use this third use of the law. And I think he gives a very eloquent and good argument for its use in both our preaching, in our teaching, and in our own personal lives. As always, if you can like this video, leave a review. It helps us share this message with more and more people. And thank you for taking the time to learn with us. Enjoy the episode. All right, and Bennett says we're live. We're good to go. Peter
Wonderful.
Scaer, how are you doing?
Doing great, thanks.
Out here in Wyoming?
It's fantastic out here. It's kind of a lonely place out here in the mountains, but there are a lot of Lutherans who like to be together here. There's a lot of excitement here, a strong sense of confession, and I know a lot of people are moving out here simply to be with other Christians. It's really quite exciting.
Do you think that's something that people need to do or to seriously consider now is maybe I need to move to a place where there's a thriving Christian community?
It's really a difficult question. I just met a couple from Massachusetts, and they have 3 or 4 kids. And they came and visited, and just yesterday they were putting money down on a house. I mean, they're dedicated to the idea that they want to raise their children in a Christian environment.
Mm-hmm.
And there are good schools out here, Lutheran schools. And also they want to save their kids from what is the transgender madness. And certain kids are very vulnerable. Kids with autism, for instance, they're very susceptible to the gender madness. So a lot of parents are saying, we've got to do something what you might think is radical for the sake of the family. Now, I do feel for, we want good Christian congregations everywhere. So if you're trying to be a good Christian church in Massachusetts, all the more power to you. And there is a certain sense in which you want to say, you should strengthen the place where you are. Your community does need you.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you got to consider your kids first if you're a mom or a dad. And if you feel it used to be that you could go to move anywhere for the sake of a job, and then you'd find a Lutheran church somewhere near you.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed because a lot of the Lutheran churches became essentially non-Lutheran. So we know the difficulty now is you go to a Lutheran Missouri Synod church and they have no liturgy, no creeds, no hymns. Well, you can't raise up Lutheran children in that environment. So you got to have a real Lutheran church if you're going to raise your children. But the other thing is children also need to have friends who are strong Christians, because kids will generally become more like their friends than they will like their mom or their dad.
Mm.
So if they're spending the day, let's just say in a public school, which is obvious, they're going to become more like the pagans of the public school eventually, because they need to form friendships, and that will mean changing their views. So, yeah, I think it is a trend. Sometimes I call it like the destination weddings. I hate that.
Hmm.
I don't want to go to Costa Rica. I'm not spending my money to go to Costa Rica for your wedding. But destination churches, it might kind of be a thing. I'm thinking Fort Wayne Redeemer Classical School is one that people are actually. The other thing is people are able to work from home now a lot. And a
Hmm.
lot of men have jobs where they can basically work anywhere in the nation.
Hmm.
And so why not go to where the Christians are? Now, having said that, again, I would never be so bold or to say this is what a family should do. There are a lot of different ways to skin the cat. Just like I support homeschoolers, I support Lutheran schools, and sometimes, people will even send their kids to a public school and it seems like it works out for them. But they better do it thoughtfully and know what they're getting into. And this does seem to be a trend that a place like Wyoming has a certain appeal. It's amazing. You think this is the other side of the world. Um, but a lot of people are finding it to be kind of a sanctuary.
When families are looking for churches, you said like a good Lutheran church. What are some of the signs that they should look for?
Well, I think in some sense, if it's online, you can watch it online. But the number one thing is the simplest is, are you using your hymnal?
Hmm.
If the hymnal is the source of your service Sunday after Sunday, you're probably already 90% there. Because this isn't to say only there are some churches that do it right because they do the sign of the cross in just the right way. It's not like that. But are you giving to your children the church of the ages?
Hmm.
Are you giving them the shared tradition? Are they on Trinity Sunday? Is it such a strange thing to recite the Athanasian Creed? How about and I've seen this in a lot of Catholic churches, they're worried that their kids aren't even reciting the Nicene Creed very regularly.
Hmm.
But our kids need the Nicene Creed. So I think that's the number one is the use of the hymnals.
What do you say to people that will, they might say something like, maybe two things. They'll say something like, the hymnal is something that doesn't come out of the Bible. It's something that's like man created, and therefore, they'll lessen the importance there. Or secondly, they'll say, that it's not experientially strong. What would you say to that?
Yeah, the hymnal is great for kids because they can participate. And it's great for older people too, whose eyesight is not so good. But from very early on, it's wonderful to see kids. They learn the liturgy at a very early age. But then you look at the American landscape. We gave to the world Jehovah's Witnesses. We gave to them Mormons, Christian Scientists. We gave a lot of heresy to the world. Now, how did it arise? I don't think it could have arisen so easily in a world that was in a church that was confessing the Nicene Creed.
Hmm.
Like you can't square Mormonism, which turns Jesus into kind of this created brother of Satan or anything like that, with God of God, light of light, very God of very God, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father. That's one heck of a theology right there. But it's something we all confess. It's something my kids confess. But when you speak the creeds, I don't know if you can say this anymore because nobody likes vaccinations. I don't know how to say it, but it is kind of like maybe it's vitamins. But
everyone likes vitamins. That's good.
Yeah, you make yourself though. You're not vulnerable to these heresies anymore because you know better.
Mm-hmm.
But without it, you look at some of our evangelical friends. Often their doctrine of the Trinity itself is really weak.
So get this. So this was in John Davidson's book. He says this, and if I'm off on this number, I'm off by no more than a couple points. But they recently did a study or whatever where they looked at evangelicals across the board, and it was either 72 or 78% said that Jesus or the Son was the first creation of the Father.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, that's a one of the prime heresies of the church, and within the 70 percentile,
Yes, like
evangelicals
it's
miss
just
that.
like game over, and hopefully they don't, live their faith. There are things, inconsistencies that hopefully their faith survives, but it's pretty bleak.
Hmm.
Davidson's right, and see, the thing is now, whatever you say about what we did in the past, so contemporary worship seemed like a cool thing to a lot of people, maybe 40 years ago, 30 years ago. But we're living in, like John Davidson said, a darkened world in which it's a competition between secularism and the new paganism. And as the world becomes more secular and maybe even pagan, we've got to double down on the things that we hold dear, because we used to have culture would serve as a kind of buttress or aid to the Christian, because it was essentially a Christian culture when I grew up.
Hmm.
That it might not have run deep, but there was everybody. That's why I went to a public school um, till through fourth grade, but all my teachers were Christian.
Hmm.
So when they say, when they pledge allegiance under God, they kind of meant it. And that's a different world now, where Christians are fewer and far between, but even more than that, they are virulently anti-Christian. And there's a kind of an indoctrination, certainly, that our public school teachers undergo, that they might not even be aware, but it's anti-Christian. So in such an environment, we do have to be as wise as serpents, not just innocent as doves, but we just got to be as wise as serpents in the caring for our children. And I hear it used to be said a lot more that, oh, we're going to send our kids to the public schools and they'll be lights of Christ and they'll be like little evangelists to the public school kids. And it's like, go send your kid to be evangelized or to evangelize the cannibals.
Mm.
It's the cannibals are going to eat your children. There is a time that we can go out in the world, but that's for us as adults to do.
Yeah.
You don't put your children who are vulnerable. They're necessarily vulnerable because they're growing in the faith. They're tender shoots. It's our responsibility is to strengthen them so that one day, I can go out in the world and talk about these ideologies and it doesn't affect me at all because I can see right through them. But that's not because I'm a better person. It's simply that I'm grown up.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what they're all about. Kids are not in that kind of, they don't have that ability yet because they're still kids.
Mm-hmm.
And, when it comes down to the judgment day, the first thing we're going to be asked about is, how did you take care of your kids?
Mm.
And the formative years are, those are the years that we've got to concentrate on. And we want to raise them so that they'll be fine in the pagan world. At least their faith will be. But that's not going to happen if we are not. I guess the point of here is, whatever you choose, you've got to be very intentional.
Mm.
So a Lutheran school can be great. I'm all for it. But you ought to look to see, is it really a Lutheran school? Are there Lutheran teachers? You might also want to see, is there a Lutheran, is it a Lutheran student body? That's going to affect your kids. You can have all the Lutheran teachers, but if it's 80% pagan kids, guess what? Your kids are going to become more like the pagans, even though you got good teachers. And again, maybe a Lutheran school might want to be a kind of an evangelistic school, and that's a great thing. But so everybody's got different roles to play, and I'm all for the Lutheran schools reaching out to the nations and maybe teaching them. But as parents, you have a different responsibility. And it's going to mean forethought, intentionality, and maybe doing things in ways that maybe you never would have dreamed that you would do. Like, I don't know what I would do today since I'm already past that age. But the thought of me and homeschooling, it just seems crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I never would have wanted to do that. The thought is horrific to me. On the other hand, I might just learn to love it now if I were a parent, because you got to say, what's the best thing? What is the best avenue? And you got to consider your options and know what you're doing, because, and there are a lot of other things that are involved here. Um, Besides what school you send your kid to, it's huge. The other basic thing is, um, probably we all know this, but the cell phone.
Mm.
You got to, I mean, that is the, some people say, for instance, the church right now, its greatest growth is taking place in Africa, and families are teeming. Go to Tanzania, large families. The churches are just prospering. They're doing great. And people are saying, well, that's the future of the church. And I'm like, yeah, for a while.
Mm.
Because it's like you look at a nation that's got wonderful teeth, beautiful teeth. They don't even have great dentists, but they have beautiful teeth. Well, give them Coca-Cola,
Yeah.
and we'll see their teeth in a generation. You have places in Africa where you don't have running water. People are living in houses that have dirt floors, but the kids have cell phones.
Yeah.
Cell phones are cheap, actually. You can spend a lot of money, but once you start mass producing them, they're really cheap technology. And what happens when you get cell phones? All the same societal poison is entering into the families and kids of Africa that we have here. It's not really any different.
Yeah. So what kind of things do you think that the church needs to be speaking about, to kind of help with this, right? To help certainly to help support families, but maybe to put it another way, are there things that churches are missing where they're not speaking about these things that they should?
Well, I think what first of all, we've got to be speaking more practically.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to seminary again, it was all preach the law and the gospel. And in that sense, every sermon kind of sounded the same. They almost became like conversion ceremonies. You come in as a pagan, and then the pastor tells you you're a sinner. You agree that you are a sinner, and then he says you are forgiven. So you go through this ritual. In some ways, it kind of reminded me of a Lutheran version of Billy Graham,
Mm-hmm.
where you just keep getting converted over and over again. Well, the people who are coming to church are Christian. That's why they're there. So and you hear pastors say, Christ died for you. He loves you. And yeah, I know. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
Why? It's like, I know it's good news, but it's not exactly new.
Mm-hmm.
But what's been lacking is advice,
Mm-hmm.
wisdom,
Maybe,
exhortation.
maybe let me frame this, because this is going to be kind of the main thing that I want to kind of walk through with you, right? So to kind of set the framework, it seems like there's been a little bit of a healthy movement in the LCMS, right? And there was the conference recently that kind of focused on this. What was it called again?
It was The Law of God is Good and Wise,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in Collinsville, Illinois.
Okay.
And it was specifically a conference that's addressing what is sometimes called antinomianism or soft antinomianism.
And what's that mean?
Well, antinomianism is like you're against the law, like you're opposed to the law. That we need to be about preaching the gospel all the way. Well, I don't think that exactly is the problem among us. Mark Serberg, a pastor in Illinois, he coined the phrase soft antinomianism. Now, I don't know whether it's that or not, but the problem is this, is that preachers in our own tradition they're preaching the law in the sense the law shows you your sin. Now, maybe we don't speak specifically enough. I tell the guys, when you're preaching, don't talk in general terms. Speak as precisely, as specifically as you can about, and it's not enough to talk about sin. You got to talk about individual sin, because otherwise it just becomes this dark movement and it becomes obscure. The 10 Commandments are helpful here, but also the kinds of things that you might find in Romans 1 or in Mark 7. Out of the heart comes covetousness, licentiousness, envy, all what are sometimes called vice lists. But talk about why is sin the way I think a lot of our people think of sin is it's like a code violation.
Mm.
Like you broke the rules. And now breaking the rules, kind of there's a nice tradition about breaking the rules. When I was in high school, there was a movie called Footloose. And there's a renegade guy, and he goes, I think, to an Iowa town or something like that. And they have hyper supposedly evangelical kind of Christians, and they have rules against dancing and maybe smoking or something like that. Like sins that are, oh, is this a sin or not? Like, oh, he was caught playing poker or something like that. Things that some people might have debates about as to whether something's a sin, but it's kind of more like a cool vice.
Hmm.
But look, you broke the rules. And I think, when you look at public schools, it's an amazing thing that the more you get rid of the law, the more rules you have.
Hmm.
Like when my kids went to a public school, it was like, if you don't think that, it's not like simply there's a law against drugs. Now there are rules against bringing ibuprofen or aspirin. So people think like, oh, he's a rule breaker. He's a renegade. To age myself, he would be like James Dean, a rebel without a cause, but he's like kind of cutting edge guy.
Hmm.
Well, that's not what sin is. Sin really is destructive, and it's selfishness, and it's dark, and it's ugly, and it doesn't make for a good life. And our young people know that when they live in these broken situations. They're not just broken, but sinful and selfish choices have made their lives living hells. So you can say, like, oh, divorce is a sin, um, but I'm forgiven. So now I'm going to put all this behind me. Now, usually putting all this behind me means I found another girl.
Yep.
But actually, I found the other girl while I was still married to the other one, if the truth were told. But I'm putting this behind me, which means I'm just putting the responsibility behind me. Now, who that doesn't work for is the guy or the girl who's been left behind. Who it doesn't work for, your kids, who on Thursday don't know which house they're going to stay at. Am I staying at mom's house or dad's house? And then people say, well, kids are resilient. No, they're not. They're going to be messed up because of what you did. So sin is a very ugly thing. I always say, like, go to a Walmart. Now you'll see, when you see something that's good and right, it's beautiful. When you see a mom say to the kid, hey, can you reach that jar of peanut butter for me? And the kid does it. Here, mom, I got it for you. There's something really sweet about that. But when you see the mother mouthing off at the kid, using foul language, when you see the kid disregarding his mother and acting in a kind of put off way, it's ugly. Like, this is your mom.
Hmm.
So, like, when you talk about the fourth commandment, honoring your father and mother, you got to describe what it is we're talking about, because these aren't rule infractions. These are the kinds of things that make life ugly, and they make life miserable, and they cause damage.
So maybe this is an example. I think we might have talked about this before, but and this might kind of tie in too to like the failure of the church when they speak about sin, and kind of this might be full antinomianism. I don't know. This was the ELCA, right? So this is a church at one of my churches. There was a family that joined, and one of the things that had happened and why they left the ELCA was their son was married, and they went to an ELCA church, and the wife decided that she wanted a divorce. They had 2 kids, and she wanted a divorce, and she wanted to marry another woman who was also married and had a couple kids. And so those 2 women get married. The ELCA church blesses it, right? And I don't know what the inner conversation, but I'm sure it went something like, well, you're forgiven because Christ died for you. So to your point, you can put that aside. And, what is the church doing when they do that? They're, to your point, they push these kids away. And now what are the kids going to think of with the church? Like, now my family is completely destroyed, and the church supported that. So they're supporting something ugly. So where they're thinking they're being like kind and supportive, they're actually promoting a poison that is permeating all these different lives.
It's a different world we're living in. And talking about being in the public school, I had a friend who, it's an amazing thing. He was the only kid whose parents were divorced in the whole class. So maybe 30 kids. He was the only one, which is crazy now to think about. But even in that situation, his par- his parents simply lived separately from one another. Neither one went off with another, found another spouse. They just couldn't get along.
Mhm.
So they got divorced, but they still cared about their kid. And when you look at the situation, kids are always going to be the collateral damage. Like that's what with abortion, the kid gets in the way of my choice, my plans, what I want to do. And divorce is a very adult sin, adultery, but it takes no consideration for others.
Mhm.
It's a very selfish move. And I don't know where in the church is a place for simple penitence, because having done something, how will allow my life in any way reflect that what I've done? See, forgiveness is true and it comes all the way. So, a woman's had an abortion. She should know that Christ has died for her. She need not live um, with the guilt that will condemn her. Christ has paid for that sin. On the other hand, there needs to be a deep recognition that the results of that sin remain. The child's not coming back to life. The pain is not going to go away. So, yeah, divorce is forgiven. However, the children are still going to pay for it. So, in that sense, we ought to be a bit more sober minded. Now, it's because of when you look at the situation we're in with the transgender and all that, there is a certain sense in which it's a situation where those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So long before you had the transgender thing and gay marriage, you had no fault divorce. So these things all happened together in the early 70s as kind of the culmination of it had been a long time coming. But in the early 70s, you got no fault divorce, you got Roe v. Wade and abortion, and you got homosexuality being normalized. It was no longer considered even a psychiatric kind of deviation, something that was off, and it was completely a political move. Um, and now we're suffering. So yeah, it's hard for people to say gay marriage is not only wrong, it's not a thing. It's not a thing. It's not like it's a wrong kind of marriage. It's not a marriage. It's fabricated. But it's harder to say that when you yourself are either divorced or your brother is, or it's in your family. It's kind of like, let's just agree not to talk about certain
Yeah.
subjects.
So is it something like we've turned, or we can fall into this trap, which is kind of what you're speaking against, and kind of and this movement's kind of pushing back against, that we might be failing in this area where we almost turn forgiveness into a hall pass,
Yeah.
right? Is that kind of some of the issue? And when we do that, we're not actually treating the issue or really offering a proper path towards real reconciliation.
Yeah. And yeah, it becomes a hall pass. And I like that because not all rules, there's certain rules. Like if you've gone through high school, there were so many rules that I thought were, as they might say in a movie I used to watch, bogus. Because it's like the it it is frustrating. Like I remember in high school, like, well, can I go to the bathroom? No, the question is, may I go to the bathroom? But the very thought that you have to ask the teacher in order to go to the bathroom, and I'll be in trouble if I do. What if the teacher's out and you broke the rule? Well, is that really sin? But it gives people the idea that sin is really less consequential than it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's and you want to see, you who think of sin but lightly, ask yourself, why is it that Jesus had to die on the cross?
Mm-hmm.
If he had to die, why couldn't he just, and this is part of what we talked about, antinomianism. With antinomianism, which is a downplaying of the cross, you also have typically an undermining of the atonement. Because if the law really is something that has to be obeyed because breaking it does terrible things, then you see why there is no forgiveness without the shedding of the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And in Lutheran kind of circles, the patron saint of antinomianism is Gerhard Ferde. He was not an LCMS pastor or professor. He became part of what was the ELCA, but he's much beloved in the LCMS. But he says things like this. He says the idea that Christ would have to die in order that God would be forgiving, that's ridiculous. He says if that's true, and Jesus is the Son of God, maybe he could just have been hurt. And wouldn't that be enough payment for our sin? And it really is blasphemous. I can't believe that when he says such things, that he maintains his kind of popularity. But when you look at Ferde and Paulson.
So who's Paulson?
Oh, Stephen Paulson is his student. And he carries on the tradition of Gerhard Ferde, who passed away, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, I guess. But Paulson is his student, and he's also sadly popular in LCMS circles.
Why do you think that is for both of them?
It could be personal ties, friendships that he might have. It also is his message is appealing to a certain element of the LCMS. And this is the element, I think, that kind of wants to keep the Lutheranism, but doesn't know how to navigate this pagan culture. So, what do you do in a world in which everybody now believes that gay marriage is a thing? Well, you don't want to say that gay marriage is good, but then you don't want to talk about it either. So what if we could just not really talk about it? And I've heard people talk like this. See, it's been a long time coming. This was very common back in the day, even among conservatives, preachers. They wouldn't talk about abortion because it's too touchy. They're going to make people feel uncomfortable. They'll say, well, it's a political topic, or they'll say, well, we all have sin. I mean, so our Lord says, if you look at somebody with anger, then you're liable to the sin of murder. Now, that's meant to say we're all guilty, so don't pretend to think that you're good. But it's used in the reverse way. Well, if I'm guilty of murder because of anger, you might as well just commit murder, right? Well, no, you don't want to do that because then the guy will be dead. So I'd rather have you angry with me, and then maybe we could forgive one another later. But if you kill me or I kill you, there's no chance there we can say, hey, I'm sorry about that. But so we had pastors who would never speak about abortion, even though, again, we're at the point in America, 60 million kids, and it keeps going. The Holocaust. If the pastor's not going to speak about that, who is going to speak up for those kids? So
what's the thought process behind those that are kind of pushing this? Maybe you can do two things. Can you kind of articulate what they're pushing and why they're pushing, right? Those that maybe kind of this hyper law gospel, they don't want to speak about sin specifically, and they really just kind of want to move on to just talk about kind of good news gospel without taking the time to hash through, here are the issues, we can diagnose these issues that are going on in our lives, and we need to be, penitent of this and look for change.
Well, you do see this, and there are a lot of good people at something like 1517.org. It's a kind of a Christian Lutheran affiliated organization out of California. And there are a lot of good people there. On the other hand, they promote the likes of Stephen Paulson. And here's the other thing is, I will put in the search when I go there, like, what teaching do you have to our young people about abortion? Abortion doesn't come up at all. They never speak about it. And, what about gay marriage? Well, or the transgender movement. You can't be among the young people and not know that it's absolutely huge in their life. Their kids, their friends uh, are going through gender transition. They might themselves be susceptible to it. You get social credit for going that way, but also it's an incredible burden on a Christian not to go along with it. You're a young person and you want to be liked by your friend group. And if you say that you think the rainbow pride is bad news, you will be hated and you will be ostracized. So I think part of the strategy is let's just not talk about that. Because after all, no sin is greater than another. And I've heard people say, well, if we talk about something like abortion, or they'll say, well, we can talk about that maybe in a Bible study, but not in church itself, because there we just want to preach law and gospel. Well, they're not really preaching the law, and the gospel is not applied to the sin that they're actually. And here's the thing is, like people say, well, it's not simply the transgender movement. It's not simply that your kid is going to be transgender. And by the way, there are so many now that are living in the shame, but also the sorrow. I mean, Christian parents are living in deep sorrow over their kids, their boy becoming a girl, their daughter becoming a son. It's very painful. But the other part is we're losing our kids because they simply buy into the ideology. So even if their bodies remain the same, their souls are being destroyed. And the way I like to put it is, no man can serve two masters. He's going to love the one and hate the other, or hate the one and love the other. But you cannot long in your heart say abortion is an okay thing and I worship the Lord Jesus Christ. One of those is going to win out.
And I think they want to hear, I think, the church speak about this. So
it's amazing that you find more of this. If I talk about these issues, even I don't think I'm being all that eloquent, you have people coming up, thank you, because their own pastors are not doing it. Part of it is they were trained not to do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're afraid, but others just think, oh, it's not something I should be doing, because they've been told that, oh, you're just preaching more law. And so the people are hungry. And here's an opportunity, I do believe. For years, we've been so worried that if we say the wrong thing, people are going to leave our church. I think it's just the opposite. The bolder we are in speaking the truth today, the more the Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod is going to be a magnet for people actually seeking the truth. And if they don't come to our church, as we see, they're going to go to other people that may or may not be Christian, that are at least addressing the problems there's a reason why Jordan Peterson, I pray he becomes a Christian. I think he could be on the edge.
Just has to shed the Jungian
impact. But there's a reason they're listening to him, and they're not getting it from their pastor. Why is their pastor not serving as a kind of part of what you're doing as a pastor or as a father? Is Christ is the wisdom of the ages. And our kids need somebody like Solomon. They need to have wisdom imparted to them. Now, part of that, the 1960s, was parents got the idea, hey, we're learning from our kids. I'm like, are you crazy? Your kids are teaching you? And you see it all the time, like a kind of common thing. Like, how do people lose the faith? A girl goes off to college. She's totally enamored by her professors there, and she comes back woke. And then she starts to teach her parents. And very often, the daughter is the one who actually converts the father, because the father wants the daughter to like him. And he doesn't know what to think. So instead of being a leader, he'd much rather bless the daughter's sin or wrong thinking than to speak the truth to the girl who needs to hear the truth.
Do you think that's a big thing? Because I've noticed that there seems to be like a correlation between individuals that I've seen that kind of push maybe that soft antinomianism and kind of like a almost like a trendy, like you'll go to like their Twitter page or something like that, and it's always like, I don't want to over categorize, right? But they've just got like a certain look, like they're cutting edge and they're relevant and they're
Yeah.
cool. But there's kind of that tie in where, like, if that's your goal to be relevant and cool, you really don't want to speak about those things. And that becomes kind of your goal. And therefore, you kind of find this comfortable middle ground where you can still kind of preach gospel things, have, kind of Lutheran things that you talk about, but put it in such a way where you can still kind of fit in with the people that you're trying to
Yeah, I
appease.
mean, it's really kind of childish, or it's pastors who don't want to be grown-ups.
Hmm.
And but again, it is like you say, this cool thing. I don't know whether it's wearing the leather jacket, or nobody can smoke cigarettes anymore, so they can't be cool. I don't think they're doing that, although they might look cooler if they did.
Maybe that's what we should be doing if we were smoking cigarettes
We
right
should
now.
just
Then we would
smoke
just
cigarettes. Yeah, that's what we should do. But that would give you kind of the edge. So you're always trying to, like, oh, look, I'm cutting edge, and you dress a certain way. That is the look. But it's the look to say we're rule breakers,
hmm
and it's okay. And you want to see how far this goes. Heresy hides right in plain sight. Like, it's not hiding. How is it that Stephen Paulson can write a 3-volume work called The Outlaw God? Jesus is the outlaw?
Mm.
That's not hiding. I think that the Antichrist is called the man of lawlessness.
Mm.
Being the outlaw God is not a good thing. But this is what he says. He says, see, this antinomian view is actually a much darker view of God, because our view of God is he hates sin. He hates it so much that he's got to punish it. He's so loving that he sends his son to die for it. And because of that, God has forgiveness in his heart. That's the atonement. I mean, what greater love is this, that he demands punishment? Yes, he demands punishment, but then he offers up his son as the sacrifice. If you look at Stephen Paulson, there's no place for sacrifice
Mm.
in his theology. Like, that's just the old God. So in Paulson, you have kind of this, it's almost like God is at war with himself. Now, if we talk Trinitarian, we can say the Father demands a price be paid for sin, and the Son offers it up. But they do this together. God said to his beloved Son, it's time to have compassion. Then go, bright jewel of my crown, and bring to man salvation. So the Father and the Son are willingly both in on this.
It is finished, right? I've done what I've set out to do.
Right. But he also is able to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because he must be forsaken. Now you think about that, the mystery of the crucifixion. Which is the harder thing? To be the Son and to be forsaken and to suffer all that. But imagine you're the Father having to sacrifice your kid.
Mm.
Now, God, in order to give us a picture of this, he tells the story, he tells Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Now, eventually, he doesn't have to do it, but it gets in Abraham's head. Sin's a huge problem. This is what's going to have to happen.
Mm.
So there is a sense in which the Father is the one that has the dagger that kills his son.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there is a payment. But now, in kind of the antinomian view, it's almost as if God is too of a double mind. So God, in his wrath, he wants to punish sin. But then, like the better part of God, the loving part of God overrides that, so that he says, no, but my love is greater than my wrath.
Mm.
And so it's one word that cancels out the other.
So it's schizophrenic.
It is a schizophrenic God. It's an
Uh-huh.
amazing thing that, again, that he's gotten away with this right in our very midst. But that's what it is. So it all becomes about two various words. So it's all about words. God gives you the law, but now he has another word, which is the gospel, which overrides the. But then what you need, see, what you don't need in that system is the sacrifice of Christ. That is of no avail. What you need is the good word. This is why for the antinomians, the word of absolution is always the big one. And absolution, it does appeal to our Lutheran ears because it's true. How do you receive forgiveness? The pastor says, I, by virtue of my office as a called and ordained servant, forgive you all your sins. So that's the word of forgiveness spoken by the pastor in the stead of Christ. And because of that, you may know you are forgiven. But that's not the source of forgiveness. It's how it's delivered. Now, what they do is they confuse the word of creation from the word of absolution. So the word of creation is ex nihilo. It comes out of nothing. So God can say, let there be light, and there's light because his word is powerful. So then they say, God can say, you're forgiven, and you're forgiven. Why? Because his word is powerful. No. The word is simply delivering you what was accomplished by the sacrifice.
Mm.
And this is why what Paulson will often say, what does the sinner need? He'll say he needs a preacher. And you think that sounds good, but it's not right. If I'm the preacher and they'll say, I'm a sinner, what do you need? I'll say, you need Christ.
Mm.
You need the forgiveness of Christ won on the cross, and then I'm going to preach Christ crucified. But in this system, what you need is the preacher that comes from Christ and says, I have a greater word, a word of forgiveness. Now, this is why, if you listen to Paulson and Ferdy, they both deny the active obedience of Christ. And the active obedience of Christ is he actually fulfilled the law for us. And they don't want the law fulfilled. They want the law simply to be done away with. So a big debate among them is they'll say that Christ was the telos of the law, the fulfillment of the law, the end of the law.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does the end mean? Does it mean the fulfillment, he's done it all, like we would say, it is finished, like you just said from the Gospel of John, or the way they interpreted it is the law is gone.
Mm.
And if the law is gone, for the Christian supposedly does not need to hear the law preached. Well, for the Christian, the law is recognized as good and right, but it's also appealing. This is why, you hear sermons when we were taught this way, largely, is that you preach the law, you show you're a sinner, then you preach the gospel, and then that's it. If you look at the letters of Paul, if you look at the teaching of Jesus, there's a whole lot of exhortation,
Mm-hmm.
of encouragement to do things. But then, a lot of good Lutheran pastors will say, yeah, but then you're just bringing the law in again. Because they're forgiven, they're going to do this spontaneously. And I said, it doesn't work that way. If you think of a kid is baptized as a Christian, but he still needs to grow in wisdom and knowledge before the Lord. So he reads the Psalms, and he reads the Proverbs, and he gets instruction from the Lord. Instruction might be, put on the armor of faith, wear the shield of faith and the helmet of salvation. And it might be, keep lamp in your oil because you don't know when the Lord is going to return. It might be, work while it is still day before the night comes and no man can work. It might be, run the race of faith and don't tire. Or it might be, fight the good fight. Now that's exhortation. But exhortation for the Christian is actually wonderful as Christian. In as much as we're sinners, we never like to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
But in as much as we're a Christian, like honoring your father and mother, that's a good thing. Now, then it's going to hit me and say, yeah, I've blown them off too much. I've not done what I should, but I love my mom and dad and I want to give them honor. Uh,
Isn't there a sense too where we just kind of, so it's, bad theologically, but even just common sense, like what you just kind of said there, right? Let me, like in anything, you could take like working out, or you could take an athlete, or you could take a student, right? A healthy student is one that can receive rebuke and then look for the answer, right? I've done my geometry wrong. So what's the solution? Because I want to get better at this. Or the athlete that says, okay, I'm failing in this area. And if I can get better at this, I can be a better lineman or a better point guard or whatever. And so they want to go work on that because so you have to recognize that first. But it seems like when we shy away from that, we just like, we don't even speak, like I've heard the example or I've heard this preached this way with Paul's exhortation that, or who should be a pastor in Timothy, right? And this was given at an ordination service, not at the one, or not an ordination, it was at a call service. It wasn't mine. Wasn't it? Yeah, it wasn't mine. But they basically said, here's the things that Paul says, you're not going to live up to this. So in other words, what they did is they made Paul say absolutely nothing.
Yeah, of course.
Except like, it's just kind of the same thing over and over. Like, oh, so Paul's talking about who should be a pastor. No. Paul just wants you to feel guilty so then you can feel forgiven. It's like, well, did he mean that or not? Like, is it okay if I'm a drunkard? Is it okay? Like, if I divorce my wife, like, is that okay?
Yeah. And there are two parts to this. One is, as you said, there is kind of rebuke. The Lord disciplines those whom he loves. And discipline's a good thing. It's like, and I remember, I'm sure you're the same, like, and this happens, and every athlete knows this. Probably everybody who's been in band knows this. But, some of my favorite teachers, as I look back, are not the ones that were my favorite then, but they actually challenged me, disciplined me, because it made me better. So discipline is like has the element of rebuke. But the other part of it is, like, if you want to understand biblical exhortation, you got to listen to a coach give a halftime speech in a football game, or you got to hear, I would imagine, when they're taking the beach in Normandy, let's do this, guys.
Mm-hmm.
There's something invigorating about that, yes, guess what? As Christians, you can do this. And our Lord says, struggle to enter through the narrow door.
Mm.
You can struggle. You can fight. You've been given this strength. But the other thing is, you actually want to do it.
Yeah.
So, like, this is why, like, the football team is a good analogy, because whatever you're doing in August on the football team is really, really hard. Or if your kid's a band geek, when I heard what the kids had to do in marching band, I was overwhelmed. I was like, there's no way they can do it. But they did it, and in a certain way, they loved it. But they weren't doing it as slaves. They signed up for it.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who goes to play for Alabama or Ohio State or Georgia, they know what they're getting into. Nobody forces them to play and to do the practice, which is going to be really, really hard. But they're doing it willingly because they want to be part of it. And what's going to make, if you don't speak this way to our young people, they're going to go elsewhere for advice. But we have to say that when you're baptized into Christ, you're actually baptized into life. And life has a shape. The Christian life has a certain way that it looks, but it's positive. Like, we should be talking very, positively. What does it mean to be a good Christian husband? Well, I can tell you, it makes for a great life.
Mm.
And people will find this. You want to find satisfaction in your life? Be a good Christian father. And these are ways that you can do it. Now, that's advice and that's encouragement, but it's also encouragement to do the very things, because now you look at Romans 7. The good that I would, I do not, but that which I don't want to do is what I do. Now, that's a very strange thing to say, because if you do something wrong, I'm going to say you wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't want to do it. Yeah, you did. You ate that piece of cake. You went over to her place because you wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But St. Paul is not speaking about that. He's speaking about, as a Christian, I really do want to be a better father. I want to be a better husband. And I hate that I have this sinful self that is still within me. So every day we're going to confess our sins.
Mm-hmm.
And every day we're going to go back to our baptism. But the Christian life is appealing because another way to think about it is you say that you're getting rid of, they say the law is not eternal, the antinomians. They say the gospel is eternal, but not the law, because people will do things spontaneously. Well, if the law is not eternal, then there's no love.
Mm-hmm.
Love is the fulfillment of the law. When you sing, it's amazing to sing like Luther's 10 Commandment hymn.
Mm-hmm.
It's so positive. It's even like upbeat because this is a tenfold sure command. It's a better way of living, and I know it's a better way. And if you don't believe that, all you got to do is talk to a convert. Talk to somebody who was living a really horrific lifestyle, whether it was like in a gang where they're in violence all the time, or they were in the sex trafficking business and they become Christian. They look back at that life. They're not thinking, boy, that sin was great.
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking how great it is to be out of that lifestyle, that life, and to be Christian, because being a Christian actually is more joyful.
Mm-hmm.
It's a better way of life. This is why things like the Beatitudes, they inspire people, even who aren't Christian, because they're like, wouldn't it be great if life were more like that? This is why Christian communities are drawing people, because you don't have to be a Christian to look at a Christian family and say, why do they have that joy?
Mm-hmm.
And why don't I have that joy? Maybe there's something I'm missing out on. What is changed about their life?
Isn't there something is there something to be said about, the salvation, the atonement, the forgiveness that brings you back into God's presence and into the Christian family, that in many ways, that's like the beginning of your life.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So like now, so you receive that on Sunday, but the point is now, and you're going to have to come do it again. Right. So for someone who's come out of a gang or something like that, it's like, great, this is great. Just so you know, like you're going to fall again. So this is going to be something we do on an ongoing basis. But now go live your life as a Christian. And the follow-up question from that individual is, so what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right. And then you say, what does it mean? And that's where the form comes in. And now the Christian life has a light aspect to it, to where your goal as a Christian isn't only that, like you go knock on a door or you talk to the person at the gym or the barbershop and say, hey, do you know about Jesus? Like, let me, do that. But there's other things you do, right? To your point, now you carry out your fatherhood in a different way. You're a citizen in a different way. You might speak against things and for things in a different way that you did. And that takes time and it takes form and it takes growth. Like your example with a child, right? They're baptized. Now what? Now raise them in the faith.
Yeah. And that's not just, there's growth, there's development. The other thing is what they try to do is they trip you up, though, because they'll say things that are true and misapply it. One of the favorite things the antinomians do is they will say good works are spontaneous. So, like, why do I need the third use of the law? Why does a preacher need to exhort or maybe chide sometimes, but encourage people to do certain things, instruct them in wisdom? Because you're a Christian, you're naturally going to do it. Well, it's not quite like that.
No.
One thing that they'll use as an analogy is they'll say, well, look at like a mother. She loves her kid. And if the kid is out in the street and she sees a car, traffic coming, she'll swoop that kid out naturally, spontaneously. And it's like, mothers ought to be pretty mad at that. First of all, I don't think you need to be a Christian to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think a Muslim mother, if she saw her kid out in the street, is going to go rush and save that kid.
Yeah.
What pagan is, if their kid asks for a fish, is going to give them a scorpion?
Yeah.
And that's part of being a mother, father, natural affections, and I'm glad for that. But the other part is the spontaneity. It really diminishes what the Christian life is, which you want to call good works. Well, work is often work.
Mm-hmm.
So that, say, for instance, you want to start a Christian or Lutheran college. You think that's going to happen spontaneously? Well, let's go back to motherhood. She spontaneously helps her kid. Well, what about making sure the kid has nutritious meals? What about making sure the kid is living in a house that's clean, that the house is a home, that the kid will find a school to go to, that the kid will have medical attention? A mother does an awful lot of work for the sake of the kid, and a lot of it takes planning. It's not just spontaneous.
Is there a sense where this is, I mean, as we're talking about this just seems like an absolutely just ridiculous thought process, because to your point, like, okay, so I'm a Christian husband. I'm not naturally a great Christian husband. I have to constantly reflect on, okay, like I'm reacting in this way. And then I have to like think through, well, how am I supposed to, and then I've got to think through what am I supposed to do as a husband, Ephesians 5, etc. And there's this ongoing, as you said, work. That's not an aha, like,
Right.
put this into a clip and post it and get 100,000 views. Cause it's like, did you hear what Peter Scaer was talking about? Like, that's common sense. Everyone knows that. It seems like we've this misthought. It's like, it just goes against what everyone knows, which is like, you're going to have to work towards these things. And the Christian faith doesn't like supersede that kind of natural understanding that, yeah, like you're going to have to struggle with this and there needs to be guidance for it. And, it just so happens that the God who created this universe has given us kind of a blueprint and has given us this wisdom over on how we're going to have to wrestle through these things. Like that's not a wild thought, but the fact that like the fact that you have to articulate this over and against this thought just seems almost ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit that, years ago when I was younger, I didn't think much of the book of Proverbs. I was kind of like, well, how did that get in the canon? And there's chapter, whatever, 8, maybe talks about the wisdom that's part of creation, that some people think it's Christ. I think it might be the Holy Spirit there. But besides that, it's just like, I thought, well, that's the Bible's version of, Ben Franklin, early to bed, early to rise, makes the man healthy, wealthy, and wise.
That's not a proverb?
Well, the funny thing is kind of what the Proverbs say.
Yeah.
They say, if you don't work, you're going to be poor and destitute. And if you do, you're probably going to prosper. Not in all cases, but that's kind of how it works.
Yeah. As a door turns on its hinges, so does the sluggard in his bed.
Oh,
That's
it's
one of my
great.
favorites.
Go to the ant thou sluggard, and I like the one because it really does hit me as I get older. Like, I don't want to go out there. There could be a lion.
Yeah.
It's like you come up with any excuse not to do things. So I think that was part of. But I bought into that, and it was, of course, totally wrong. And now, but part of that was the overlap between, let's just say, Ben Franklin or kind of Aesop's fables and the Bible. But that's the whole point, is there's overlap because wisdom is written into creation. That's the God who made creation. What is seen by revelation or is offered by revelation by Solomon in the Proverbs is also seen in various respects by the people who seek wisdom in this world. This is why pagans often, it's a strange thing.
Well, they're groping in the darkness, right? Paul.
Well, they often live, though, more wisely than we do. Like, people were talking about marriage as being simply a Christian thing. Well, okay. And they'll say, well, gay marriage is not going to affect us. We'll just keep it biblical. That doesn't explain why the divorce rate in Hindu India is only like 1%. They're not Christian there. Now, there are a lot of Christians there.
Yeah.
But it's not a Christian nation. But they seem to have learned something about divorce, and it's a very, very low divorce rate. Well, what's the wisdom there? Well, that a lot of times their marriages are arranged. And that both families are all in on it. Like, when you get married, you are completely intertwined with that other family, and you don't mess with that. So, but they're able to see these things. The other thing is it's remarkable that often it's the seculars who are pushing gay marriage and the divorce culture are not living that way. Like, in upwardly mobile neighborhoods in America where people are not going to church, often the divorce rate's very low because they just kind of know how life works. and they want to be successful, and they want their kids to be successful. And so you look in the bad part of town where things are dangerous. It's not race. The problem is the broken family. And they say, well, but they push it. But they don't live by the values that they preach. They live by different, and it's the same sort of thing. Like you can speak of something like drinking too much. Okay, common problem. And but you don't see the wealthy, the upwardly mobile doing that. They're not into the 3 martini lunches because they're like, no, I gotta work.
Yeah.
So they're living according to wisdom, which is written into creation. But we should take that as the God of creation is the God of salvation. That's our God. So it's really a sad thing when Christians don't embrace their own wisdom. It comes from our God who created this world. But instead, it's thought of like it's 2 different things, creation and salvation. So that, of course it is, but salvation is the renewal of creation. This is why, and this is very important, like with the transgender thing. It's not as if because of salvation that creation is obliterated. It's brought to an even greater, in the resurrection, we're not going to lose our male and female. Our created bodies are not going to somehow be gone. It'll just take it to another level, but never denying that which came before.
Is that what the gospel does to the law?
Was good.
Is that what the gospel does to the law too?
Well, what the gospel does, well, it's that's an interesting way of putting it. The gospel reveals to us what the law really is, because the law was always written into creation. But it's fascinating. Here we could bring in C.S. Lewis as far as Christians needing the law, because I think it was in Prelandra where you meet a kind of Eve who lives on another planet. And
which is Paraland. Oh yeah, you eat the green lady.
That's
who's being tempted.
It's a difficult one. I remember reading it. It's a little bit more difficult to read, and I think also for C.S. Lewis to write. But what he was trying to show there, what with Eve, was she was innocent, but she wasn't righteous. So when you look at Adam and Eve, they were not righteous in the same way that Christ was righteous. Like the centurion said, surely this was dikaios, not innocent. Like in the ESV translation, it says, surely he was dikaios. To be dikaios is what we will be in the heavenly places, because sin will no longer have any appeal to us. And it's hard to imagine that now because sin is there and I'm tempted. But when we're in the heavenly places, it will be like, why would I go to the toilet to eat? It's just ugly. It's terrible. You see it for what it is.
And you do get a taste of it. I can just give you an example. Who's the Dana White? Do you know Dana White?
I think so.
So he's the CEO of UFC.
Oh, yeah.
And so something interesting happened not that long ago. So he'd struggled with some like very severe health issues for a while. Severe sleep apnea, where he couldn't sleep even more than 2 hours. His heart rate was just absolutely ridiculous. It was like 180 over 120, something like that. And he was seeing, he's a billionaire. So he's seeing the best doctors in the world and they can't deal with it. Long story short, he met this guy who, I'm not going to go down that whole thing, but Gary Brecka put him on this like different, like this program. And in like 10 weeks, it was gone.
Yeah.
It was absolutely wild. Well, he was speaking about this, and here's kind of the point, is he was reflecting. He's like, yeah, I used to drink and I used to eat, a lot of carb heavy stuff and And he's like, now I don't even desire it. Like I have no desire for it. And the point is he now tasted a much better lifestyle, where now he looks back at, for him, this carb heavy meal, which was having heavier effects on him than on most people. And he goes, like, the best smelling pizza is not even enticing anymore because I know what it's like to not eat that pizza and wake up tomorrow morning feeling great.
Yeah.
Right. And that, in a sense, that's what that would be like. Right.
No, it is. And so like, if you look at Adam and Eve at that time, in a sense, they were like children. And, here you can speculate, but it might be helpful. if Adam and Eve had continued to kind of grow as they would have in wisdom before the Lord, Satan's temptation would have eventually been absolutely ridiculous to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would I want that? Because they would see it for what it was. But so they were innocent, but they were not yet where they would be. And I think that's helpful in raising children. In baptism, all the sins are washed away, but you still got to build up that life.
Mm-hmm.
Kids still need to. They've got to learn the creed. They got to be told Bible stories. They've got to be instructed in all things in the faith, and it's not because they're not Christian. They are, but they're tender Christians.
Mm-hmm.
They're young Christians who need to grow in that and to be strengthened by that. And now, part of this is probably we didn't want to appear like pietists.
Mm-hmm.
We're not pietists, but piety is a good thing. And and the lack of piety is ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at piety, it's reverence. Piety is very closely related to gratitude. And we're living in a generation of scoffers, and they have no gratitude for what came before them. So you knock down a statue of George Washington. You don't even know who George Washington was.
Mm-hmm.
You're not even fit to tie his shoes. You're a nothing person, but somehow you're greater than George Washington, right? Well, what kind of gratitude is that? And piety is not just reverence towards God, but it really is, it's reverence towards God first, but then also it's honoring father and mother because they are father and mother. And then it is also appreciation for your nation, for all the things like, look around you. God can say to Job, were you there when I created the world? Maybe you ought to not be so snotty because you couldn't have done it. But then that also works with, if I had to build a cabin and I had to get electricity and running water, all the things that I take for granted, could I do it? For me, the answer would be no.
Mm-hmm.
I would be useless and helpless. And most of the kids today would be the same thing. So do you ever stop in gratitude and say, look at the life that you have now? You were born into it as a gift. And you ought to have reverence for God who created you. But maybe your parents weren't perfect. But maybe they also gave you food, something to eat and something to drink. Maybe they put a roof over your head. Is not worth a word of thanks. Maybe your nation could be improved. On the other hand, you got a lot of benefits for living here. And I wouldn't, as Americans, that should be an easy one. But I see that same sort of piety in Tanzanians when they sing their song. They're proud to be from where they are. I've heard the patriotic songs in Russia or in Belarus. It was just so beautiful to hear the Belarusians singing as Belarusians because they recognized that who they are was dependent on those who came before them. So piety is humility, reverence, and gratitude. And, we don't foster, talking about going back to the worship thing, long before the young people were going and burning down things in the city and knocking over statues, we were doing the same thing in our churches. Get rid of the organ, get rid of the hymns, get rid of the hymnal, because you're going to create this worship. This is not my grandfather's church. Why isn't it your grandfather's church? Are you somehow not proud of him anymore? Do you not want to sing with him? Are you not happy to sing some of those same hymns that he sang? Or have you lost gratitude and piety? So we were knocking things down in the church long before they were doing it in society.
That's a good point. Let's take a quick break. All right. Let's do this because it's dark outside and we've got to get you down what is this, Mount Casper?
Mount Casper.
We're way up here, by the way.
Oh my goodness! Yesterday I was hiking all over and I kind of got lost. It's a big mountain.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got to get you down the mountain. And so let's do this. I think at the conference you mentioned earlier, what was it one more time?
It was the law of God is good and wise.
There was David Peterson talked about this, right? And
Yeah.
it was cool hearing him talk about it because he said, hey, I was kind of taught this. And for years, I preached this way, kind of this like very law gospel, never kind of end with any kind of third use. And he said he's kind of repented of that. And he's shifted on that. And now he was able to kind of articulate it in hopes that others will be able to see the same thing and make those same kind of pivots. So like, what would be your advice for just kind of the church? Maybe think of two audiences here. You've got the lay people, right? That are hearing sermons or looking for churches. And then you've got maybe pastors that are listening and maybe they haven't ever even thought of that this is kind of an issue.
Well, this came up today when I was talking to pastors' wives. One woman said, "Oh, thank you for speaking like this." And I was speaking about the issues of the day, but our people are hungry for instruction. They want to know what the Christian life looks like, and they want to be encouraged to actually live it. Because they know it's not enough to say, I believe in Jesus and therefore nothing. And they know people's faith is being destroyed. You don't get saved by doing good works, but when you do that which is evil, it can destroy the faith. When you act as if evil is an indifferent thing, it can destroy the faith. But when you look at the kind of people that are popular, especially our young men, they're and women too, they want to know, though, that their lives matter, and they do matter. And they want to talk about the Christian life. And we can speak directly. We got to think, what would you say to your son? One way of thinking about it is, how are you going to be saved? I guess the deeper answer is, you are saved by grace through faith apart from works. And it's all because of Christ, his death on your behalf. That's the answer. But if my son is going off to college, what do I say? I don't simply say, hey, trust in Jesus always. You say, hey, remember when you're going to college or you're going to a new city, I want you to go to church. I've looked into the situation. This is a faithful church. You ought to go there. They need practical advice. And, this is true in all things. It's true in piety. You can say, believe in Jesus Christ. That's great. But you might want to say, pray Luther's morning prayer every morning and his evening prayer at night. You might want to say, like, you could say to a couple who's like kind of fighting, you can just say, remember your forgiveness. Well, okay. Or you might say to them instead, give them something to do. You might say, pray the Lord's Prayer every day together out loud. And then they'll have to pray, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And you start, the more
Is that really in there?
Yeah, the more you pray it, the more you actually start to believe it, or you're actually preaching to yourself.
Yeah.
And so instruction is a very good thing. And we should not be afraid of helping our people out, because the law is good and wise. And again, don't think because the sinner hates the law that the Christian does as well. The Christian loves the law because, and I think this is going to be actually the way by which pagans are going to come back to the church, in as much as they will. They're going to see the Christian life that's going to make the difference. They're going to see kids who honor their father and their mother. They're going to see people who help one another out, not kill or act in kind of brutal ways. They're going to see husbands who actually care for their wives. They're going to see a neighbor who actually wants to help and improve their property, not take it away. The Christian life is goes back to truth and beauty go together.
Mm.
The Christian life is a beautiful one, and it has an appeal. And again, I think of Bernard Nathanson. He was one of the founders of NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League. And he actually became a Christian. And first, intellectually, he said maybe abortion really wasn't a good thing. But what changed his heart was he saw Christians together praying. He saw the joy. He saw them, heard them singing, and he's like, "What joy do they have that I don't have?"
Mm-hmm.
And again, I see it a lot of times. I'm seeing it now in young people who are inspiring me more and more. At the seminary, I'm seeing young men who almost have like turned back time. Men with sometimes beards, and their wives might seem old-fashioned, but they're not old-fashioned. And what's the amazing thing to me is it's a beautiful thing. If I could bring my relatives, secular relatives from the East Coast, if I could just bring them to the seminary for a day or two, because they've never seen that. They've never seen the Christian life in action. And of course, they're sinners, these people. We're all sinners. But when you see a Christian family living out the Christian life, it's totally different than what the world has to offer. And what we're doing in our preaching and our teaching is we're encouraging that living out, and not as some sort of imposition on our people. Oh, I'm not kidding. You've got to do that. Like, oh, you're throwing the law back at me. No, it's an invitation towards a better life, because it is better. And, again, the 10 Commandments, for the way Luther explains it in the Catechism, it's amazing how positive they are, even though they're largely don'ts, except for the fourth. They're all often spoken about in the most positive ways. Like, this is a better way of life.
Mm-hmm.
Do you really want to be around people who are always speaking badly behind people's backs, making stories about them, gossip? It's an ugly thing. This is not the Christian way of life.
Mm-hmm.
So, but this takes time. It takes instruction. Christianity, it is, many people come to the faith over a certain amount of time. Like Augustine, it's not always like a road to Damascus experience, but you can say Christianity begins with baptism for sure. That's a foundation. But the Christian life is one of constant growth into maturity. Now, again, we have this sinful flesh with us, but the Christian life is actually worth living. And we should not be afraid to say so, because our people want to hear it, because they actually want to live as Christ lived. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Like, I admire my certain things about my mom and dad, and they're sinners, but I can look at them and say, I want to be like her. I want to be like him in this. I admire that. I emulate it. You say, I would like that. We have coaches like that, mentors, teachers. And you're like, yeah, I want to be like him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that's a natural and good thing. And I see the life of Christ, and yet I know I'm a sinner, but that's who I want to be. That's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, two thoughts there. One, when you talked about that, or when you gave the example of like, hey, son, like say the morning prayer, say the evening prayer, let your holy angels be with us, that the evil foe may have no power over us, or you say, do these, go to church. This is a good church for you. If you were my father, and you're around the age of my father, I think you know my father, but if he said that to me, I wouldn't be crushed by the law.
Right.
There's no way I would be like, oh,
exactly.
man,
wow,
goodness. Yeah.
Wow.
Like, it's, once again, that's so, to bring that in, it's like, it's an artificial thought to bring that into that type of conversation. And then the second thing too, is just the opportunity for the church, if we can do those things. There was a good example. John Davison was talking about this, and I forget if it was like the Germanic tribes, but it was an example where they would send a missionary, and then they would kill the missionary. And then they would send another. And by the way, these are all volunteers, right? So then the next
Right.
guy would say, well, send me now. And then he would go. And they killed like 4 or 5. And it wasn't until like right around the 6th or so where like that entire area was converted. And they were converted because they said, these people keep coming to us, right? And it's just there's something going on here that's otherworldly. But that's where the guidance that God gives does give you the instruction to live your life in such a way that actually becomes beautiful first to the people, and then they're interested, and then you have the opportunity to articulate the truth. But if you can't live a life that is in some way formed by God's law and God's wisdom, you're not going to live a life that looks beautiful to the outside, and then you're never going to have an opportunity to say, well, here's why. Here's why I came after the first 5 were martyred,
Yeah,
because
this
of
is
Christ.
why,
And
among us, there are certain phrases that really are misused, and they do people no good. One of them among the antinomians is simul justus et peccator. I'm a saint and a sinner at the same time, which is true. But the way it's used is if to say, well, I'm always going to be a sinner, therefore, what does it matter?
hall pass, man.
Yes, the hall pass. But, again, all you have to do when you think of that, again, just talking about it, you see how absurd that is.
Mhm. Hey,
know-
Raylene, wife.
I've just known
I'm
too,
simultaneously, so I'm gonna blow up. Like, right.
I've known too many wonderful Christian people to believe that.
Mhm.
Because I know they're sinners, but boy, oh boy, are they wonderful people. And they shine the light of Christ. It might be an older teacher, whatever it is. It might be the woman who's in your church and she's volunteering. These are saints among us. And why wouldn't you follow their way? Because I like to be like her too.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is all we're saying. In some ways, it's so simple. But boy, oh boy, it can be undermined. It takes a lot of bad theology to undermine what is really such a simple and beautiful truth.
Mhm.
But it's happening still among us. So I hate to be among the teachers that are leading astray. But that's what we got a lot of that going on.
I'm optimistic. Are you optimistic? I'm optimistic on all things.
I'm totally optimistic with this next generation of Christians that, to me, they came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
If I look at our students, and we have this thing at our seminary, we're saying we're forming servants in Christ. And I'm not against that. But I think the larger truth is these guys are already coming to us as a gift from God. And they've already seen what's wrong, and they want a different life.
Mm.
And in this sense, it's often the younger clergy and the younger pastors and seminarians who are saying, we don't want this. We want something better. And they're living it out.
Mm.
Now, that doesn't mean they are not going to make mistakes too and, overshoot here and all that. But it's refreshing because they actually want to live the Christian life. That's all we're saying.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a kind of a shape to the Christian life, and it's a better life. It's a more beautiful life when I see it. And it's the kind of person I actually, as a Christian, want to be. I don't want to be like the creeps that I see. Now, is there creepiness in me? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to be a selfish jerk. Is there selfishness in me? Yeah, but that's not who I want to be. In Christ, I see a much better life. And that's all we're doing in the churches when it comes to third use of the law is simply mapping out what this life is, encouraging them. We're saying, and you can actually do these things. You can do these things. Exhortation, sometimes it's a little curb, sometimes it's a little chastisement even, or discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's sharp a little bit. But like you say, even when I'm disciplined by a coach or by my father, I don't take it as a terrible thing. They're not trying to make my life worse. They know they want my life to be better. That's why they're doing it. So it's not such a bad thing. I don't know why we're so afraid. And we shouldn't let a false version of Lutheranism, which again, I think you find in Gerhard Forde and Stephen Paulson, we shouldn't let a false Lutheranism drive us away from what we know to be true in the scriptures. and what's true in our life.
Yeah. Well, thank you for speaking on this.
It's been a pleasure. Great to be here.
So
enjoy the great wilds of Wyoming.
we'll do our best. So what's your speaking schedule? Because we'll travel. You're in Fort Wayne. We interviewed you in Fort Wayne. You're in Wyoming. When are you going to Hawaii? Because we'll follow you to Hawaii and we'll do an interview out there.
This summer, I still have, in a week, I'll be going to Pennsylvania, and then God willing, I'll be going. I've never been to Salt Lake City, Utah, so I'm supposed to go there in July, God willing. But it's been a very busy summer so far.
Yeah, we'll come out to Waconia and we'll interview. That's Waconia, Minnesota.
Oh, I would love that. Yeah, I love Minnesota.
Come visit, and
I thought that was going to be Hawaiian Island or something. That's what I like.
No, but we do have a lake.
Oh, well, that'd be all right.
Yeah, we could take you out on. Well, I could get someone to take you out on a boat. We don't have a boat, but
yeah, Minnesota would be great.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thank you very much. I appreciate this, and let's go get you some food.
Let's do it.
All right. Cheers.